Hi, welcome back to Jumping into Life. I'm glad you did return, and I hope you followed me or subscribe as I asked you my last episode. If you hadn't, please do so. Not for my own benefit, but so others who follow you via your social media will know that you're following a very, very good podcast. And this one is strictly about mental health, nothing political, nothing controversial, just for everyone's benefit. And you can share the episode and the podcast with other people. So please subscribe or follow. And then as you watch the episode, if you like it. And then share it on your social media platforms. Now, I'm on Blue Sky at Jumping Into Life. You can find me on Spotify. You can find me on TikTok. You can find me on YouTube and all the other podcast platforms. So Jumping Into Life. And then you will find great resources at jumpingintolife.com. That's my website. I have links to mental health resources. If you want to support this podcast financially, you can do so by purchasing merchandise. I do have a online store, and there's a link on the website for that, as well as books that I've written. So I encourage you to support that way as well. Now, this episode is entitled, "Hey, Boundaries, Please." Okay, and I have a perfect guest to discuss it. I'm not a therapist. I can't tell you what I know what boundaries are, but I brought in a professional to tell you what you should do, how to recognize them, how to define them, and how to respect other people's boundaries. So let me introduce you to Cassandra Rowe.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Thank you for agreeing to come on Jumping Into Life. So before we get started about boundaries, let's talk about your street cred. So people know I just didn't bring on anybody from the
Right,
street. So
right.
tell us about your qualification. I know you have about 2 decades experience as a therapist, but just you know briefly
You have to
talk
say it
about
like
that.
that.
Well, you
So,
look 10. Okay,
thank you
that
very
helps.
much. So, my name is Cassandra Rowe. I'm a licensed professional counselor and a supervisor. So, I supervise preliminarily licensed clinicians who are trying to work towards their full state licensure. I have been in practice since 2004. Um, and I've been a supervisor since 2006. Um, I specialize in working with women primarily. I do see adolescents and teenagers 13 and up. My practice really has evolved. I started off working strictly with teenagers who had experienced trauma and who were in the foster care system. And then I've evolved to working with mostly professional women who tend to have their lives pretty much together. However, their relationships, a lot of times, they're not as successful in those. I also work with individuals who've experienced trauma, so I have a background in working with trauma, specifically sexual trauma, and so I am trauma informed trained.
Great. So you are credential and can speak about boundaries.
Yes,
Okay.
love to talk about boundaries. It's my favorite thing to talk about.
Okay. So let's start with defining boundaries.
Okay.
What are boundaries?
So boundaries are guidelines, they're limitations, they're rules that you set for how you want people to handle you or interact with you or behave around you. They also define how you're going to respond if somebody has violated a boundary.
Okay. Now you said handle you.
Mm-hmm.
That word is like a grenade. So elaborate on what you mean by how to handle you.
Right. So the reason why I love to talk about boundaries is because there are all these little subtle things that boundaries do for us. And one of the things that they do for us is they teach other people how to treat us. And so when I say how you want to be handled, I want to be handled with care. So I
Okay.
want people to treat me with care. And so communicating my boundaries give people an idea about how I want to be treated.
Okay. So before I ask you how one should communicate their boundaries,
Mm-hmm.
let's identify the different types of boundaries.
Okay. So there are a lot of different types of boundaries, but the ones that we focus initially on are time boundaries, physical boundaries, sexual boundaries, um, intellectual boundaries, material boundaries. Most people know what physical boundaries are,
Are
but
you sure?
well, you know, they're probably more comfortable talking about or identifying a physical boundary, because physical boundaries can sometimes be easy, but it's those emotional boundaries and those other ones that sometimes get us are sticky.
So
Yeah.
let's define each one.
Okay.
Let's define physical
Okay.
boundaries.
So a physical boundary has to do with your touch, with how you want to be touched, if you want to be touched, your physical kind of space. So that's a physical boundary.
Okay. How does someone let someone know, hey, this is a physical boundary,
Mm-hmm.
don't touch me, or just don't cross this line?
Right. So boundaries can be communicated, they're most effectively communicated verbally, but they can be communicated with our behavior. So, for example, one of my boundaries, and this is funny, is that if I go to a movie theater and the movie theater is empty and I take a seat, it annoys me when someone comes and sits right by me.
I thought
Like,
I was the
why?
only one who got offended by that.
Like, why ever? Like, there's a whole theater.
Yeah.
And so that is one of my physical boundaries, that I like my personal space.
How do you tell somebody, hey, there's like 300 other seats in here, why this one?
Well, I don't think you have to tell them, but you can communicate that by getting up and moving. So
Why
that
should you have to get
communicates.
up and move? I mean, you set the boundaries by saying, I'm sitting here, there's
Right.
300 other seats in here.
Right.
You move. I picked the seat, I will sit
Right.
first.
So boundaries are not about controlling other people.
Oh,
It's
okay.
about communicating to other people how you want to be treated. So if I get up and move, I've communicated that I don't want to sit right next to you.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, if someone violates that, and if I move and they move, I've had that happen actually. That's kind of weird, isn't it? But so if I move and they move, I'll say, "Hey, can you move over a couple seats because I want this space."
Yeah.
Yeah.
You just don't call a movie concierge like, hey, this person
No,
is a stalker. It
we
can't
don't need to
creepy.
do that
You know,
unless they're stalking you. Yeah.
I mean, they followed you from one seat to the other.
Yeah.
That's kind of
Some,
stalking.
but one of the things that we learn about boundaries is that everyone's boundaries are not the same, and some people are more apt at communicating and identifying their boundaries. Like, my boundaries may be different from yours in different areas. It doesn't mean that mine are wrong or yours are wrong.
Yeah.
Remember, we set the boundaries because that makes us feel safe and feel comfortable, and that's how we want to be treated.
Okay. So, intellectual boundary.
So, lots of intellectual boundary violations going on now in the world. So, intellectual boundaries have to do with your thoughts, your opinions, your preferences. And so, if we think about what's going on in the world politically right now, people are demeaned, they're called stupid, they're called uneducated, they're called unqualified because they have a different opinion, or they, have a different political party.
Yeah.
So intellectual boundaries have to do with, what you think and your preferences about things.
Okay.
Yeah.
Time boundaries.
Time boundaries are a great one. Lots of people struggle in that area. So time boundaries not only have to do with how you choose to spend your time, but time boundaries also cover how much time you're willing to give someone else. And so a lot of times, especially in relationships or on our jobs,
Yeah.
our time boundaries are violated. If you're supposed to work, 8 to 4, occasionally you may have to work overtime, or occasionally you may have to come in to get ready for an early meeting. But for the unstated rule to be that everybody works, 12 hours a day and aren't paid for it, that's a boundary violation.
It's also a workplace violation.
You think? But it happens all the time.
Yeah. Well, they
Yeah.
should call HR about that.
It happens
Like,
all
I
the
wouldn't
time.
pay for that.
Some of the things that, or simple things like we don't take a lunch, like
Okay.
if you are entitled to a lunch during the day, then if that is what makes you feel comfortable and safe and that's what you need, then you should take a lunch. And so one of the ways that we don't communicate our boundaries is that sometimes we don't communicate them because we want to keep the peace, or we don't want to look like, the one man out or the oddball out.
Right.
And so it's important that we communicate our boundaries. I take a lunch. And so people who work with me know that. And so it's kind of a quiet joke, like they're looking for me. Oh, she's at lunch.
Yeah.
Yeah, I am.
So if someone sets a time boundary,
Hmm.
but then they violate it
Hmm.
themselves by like not taking a lunch,
Right.
is it really a boundary?
Well, what you've done is communicated that that's not a strong boundary for you, right? So I don't want you and your listeners to think that boundaries can't be changed, because boundaries are always a work in progress. And so let's say we're working on a project and that calls for, today I'll have to eat lunch while I'm working.
Yeah.
That's fine. But on an everyday consistent basis, if you say my boundary is that I take a lunch, then you should take a lunch,
Okay.
because you're communicating to people that that's something that's important to you, so they know what to expect. That's one of the reasons why boundaries help us feel safe in relationships, because they identify what people can expect from us. So people expect that I'm going to take a lunch, so they're not really looking for me during that time because they know I'm going to take a lunch.
I would think like the changing of the time boundaries
Hmm.
will create some conflict in the workplace,
Right.
in a workplace context, because they're like, oh, she or he doesn't generally take a lunch, and then when that person says, you know what, I'm taking my lunch,
Hmm.
but then the person who expects them to work through their lunch
Hmm.
pushes back.
Right.
I mean, how does one handle that
Right.
potential conflict?
So, anytime you're setting a boundary in an area that one required a boundary, two, you haven't previously set a boundary, you have to expect that there's going to be, and I don't like to call it pushback, but it is going to be some conflict, okay? And so that's why it's important to communicate the boundary. And so if someone says, "Well, I was looking for you and, we couldn't find you." Well, oh, I was at lunch.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So is that something that you plan on doing? Yeah, I'm going to take my lunch. Now, I'm willing to work with you on, because I want to respect other people's boundaries. Like if you want to take a lunch too, I want to respect that.
Yeah.
So I'll work with you on at what time I'm going to take that lunch if that's an issue. But it's not negotiable that I'm going to take a lunch. Like that's
So
part
that
of
seems like a
what I need
subtle
to do.
pushback, like you throwing it back at them in a non-confrontational manner, like, well, you're gonna take a lunch, you take yours, so I'm gonna take mine.
Well, but the thing is that it doesn't matter whether you take one or not. If if that is my boundary, then that's my boundary. It's not really based on what you decide to do.
Yeah.
So it's not really a pushback, but one of the things that we know about boundaries is that because they other people don't really have to understand them or agree with them, but they do need to honor them.
Yeah.
So sometimes the pushback is that you don't understand why would you need to take a lunch? Like I don't need to take a lunch.
Yeah.
And so we don't really need to understand why somebody is setting that boundary. But in order to have a healthy relationship, we need to honor that boundary. So acceptance is really big
Okay.
in boundaries as well.
Let's talk about emotional boundaries.
Okay, so emotional boundaries have to do with your feelings.
Okay.
So it also has to do with um, how someone holds your information. So an emotional boundary could be, I don't like it when people raise their voice in a conflict. Okay. And so if we are in any sort of relationship, working relationship, romantic relationship, friends, and I've said, "Oh, when you raise your voice, that really makes me feel unsafe."
Yeah.
Then that's my boundary. I don't want to be around people who are raising their voice when they're in conflict. And so you may not understand that. You may have, grown up or feel comfortable with yelling and screaming. And, that's just culturally in your culture. That may be something that's acceptable. It doesn't matter. That's something that makes me feel uncomfortable and it makes me feel emotionally unsafe. And so we should honor each other's boundaries. It also has to do with like your information. If I tell you something in confidence, I need to be able to trust that you are not going to repeat what I've told you in confidence, because that's an emotional boundary violation as well.
To me, it sounds like a breach of trust is
Oh
more
yeah,
so than emotional
definitely,
boundary.
definitely. Boundaries will increase intimacy. Like, they healthy boundaries help us increase our intimacy.
Um, Sexual boundaries.
Sexual boundaries. And so it's just like it sounds. But it's more so whether, you want to engage in any sexual act. Sexual boundaries also have to do with the kind of sexual information I want to be around. So in a workplace, lots of people get in trouble in a workplace for, making sexual jokes, making sexual references, making references to people's body parts, things like that. So sexual boundaries have to do with my body, how I want to use my body, or any sexual information that I want to be around. So if I work in, let's say, I've worked in a predominantly male environment before. Let's say I work in a predominantly male environment, and there is a picture of a, swimsuit model in the break room, and she's very scantily clad. Okay, if that makes me feel uncomfortable, then that really is a sexual boundary violation, because I have a right to feel comfortable in my workplace as well. And
So how do you
so,
communicate that to that group or the area where a lot of people are working? Someone put that post up there that's been there for like 5 years, and you're
right,
the new person coming
right,
in.
right. I don't think that it matters how long it's been there, because if we don't set one of the challenges, or one of the things that you know prevent people from setting boundaries, is because they don't want to feel like they are not a team player. Okay. So what if I was a victim of sexual assault? Okay. And I'm working in an environment where there's, this image that's up that reminds me of that assault. Should I not feel safe in my workplace? Should I not feel safe? And then the people that I work with, should they not want to provide an environment that makes their coworker feel safe? And so it does take a lot of communication. Like, hey, that really kind of makes me feel uncomfortable. Like, is there another poster we can put up, or calendar we can put up? Is there something we can put up that makes everybody feel comfortable or inspires everyone?
Now, I understand like a lot of people who have been victims of sexual assault or anything traumatic.
Mm-hmm.
They may not want to share it.
Right.
But in order to get people to understand why you're so passionate about not having that image that reminds them of their
Mm-hmm.
trauma
Mm-hmm.
without disclosing that trauma, how do you communicate with
Right.
someone the
Right.
seriousness of your request?
Well, I do think that it's not, you are not required to, disclose that. I'll go back to my original statement that you don't have to understand why that's a boundary for me. I was using that as an example to give you a reference point.
That was a good example. That's why I brought the
Yeah.
question. Because some people, there's a lot of people
Yeah.
probably out there
Oh,
who don't
yeah.
want to disclose
Yeah.
trauma, but the people they're talking to or trying to communicate their
Mm-hmm.
displeasure with
Mm-hmm.
whatever they are seeing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, some people just want an explanation, like, well, I don't see a problem. It's a picture of this.
Right. So I don't like cantaloupe. Do I have to explain to you why I don't like cantaloupe?
Yes, because I like
I
cantaloupe.
just don't like it. I just don't like it.
So I had to remove my cantaloupe from my kitchen table where the other fruits are because you don't like the cantaloupe.
Well, not at your house.
I know that's a simple analogy, but
Not at your house.
oh, not in my house.
Not
I
at
can
your
keep my
house.
cantaloupe in my house.
Definitely. But I don't have to eat your cantaloupe, and I don't
Okay.
have to be around your cantaloupe. And if I am allergic to cantaloupe and you say, well, this is my house and I want to keep my cantaloupe here, then I'm probably not going to come to your house. And that is my choice. In a workplace, I don't have a choice on whether I go in the break room,
Right.
or whether with the bathrooms in the break room.
Yeah.
Like, what if there's one bathroom?
Yeah.
So I don't really have a choice. And so that's why we have workplace, harassment laws and things like that, because that comes out of boundaries. Like, just because this makes you feel comfortable, we also have to be mindful that this may make someone else feel uncomfortable.
Okay.
Yeah. So you don't have to explain why something is your boundary.
Okay.
It's just your boundary.
So if you and your husband ever come to my house, I know to put away the cantaloupe.
I'm not allergic to it. You don't have to put it away. I'm just not going to eat it. I'm just not going to eat it.
Don't offer you any cantaloupe.
You could offer me cantaloupe. I'm going to push it to the side.
Okay.
That's my boundary. I don't like cantaloupe, so it's going to be over here. So if you see that, okay, it's a non-issue. Now, if you say, well, why aren't you eating that cantaloupe?
Yeah.
Well, I don't like cantaloupe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because you have articulated to me you don't like
I don't like cantaloupe.
Okay. All right. So the last one, material boundary. That was interesting.
Yeah. Material boundaries has to do with your stuff. So not only your stuff, but how you choose to use your stuff. So if you say, hey, Cassandra, can I borrow your car? Which I know you wouldn't say that. And
I might.
The answer would be no. Okay. But
I just saw your car. I will probably ask you.
The answer is no. That's my boundary. But if you say, hey, Cassandra, I have an emergency. Can I borrow your car? And I'm like, sure. And you say, well, I'm going to the hospital. Okay. There's an emergency, a family emergency. I'm going to the hospital. I gave you permission to use my car to go to the hospital, right?
Yeah.
I didn't give you permission to use my car to go pick up your girlfriend, as the kids say now, out here flossing. I didn't give you permission to do donuts in the parking lot in my car. I gave you permission to use my material.
Yeah.
To
what is
go
flossing? Because that's a new one. I'm
bragging, pretending is yours.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Putting on. Yeah.
Okay.
So if I give you permission to use something of mine for that purpose, then that's what it should be used for. You also don't have permission to let someone else use it. So when you think about just different conflicts that people sometimes find themselves in, a lot of times it's because there are poor boundaries.
Yeah.
That people do not respect other people's boundaries. Sometimes they don't even know, that that's a boundary. So I'm sure sometime in college or law school or somewhere, somebody asked somebody to use their car. It happened to me in college.
Yeah.
You ask, can you use my car to go to the store? I find out you in Denton. We go schooling. Like, that's 5 cities over.
Yeah, yeah.
So a lot of times when we have these conflicts, it's a boundary issue. Yeah. Because boundaries help us to keep down conflict.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did Danielle tell you I asked her to use her car in school? No, I'm just kidding.
She didn't. But I know that would have been a no, because I know her.
Okay.
That would have been a no.
Danielle is a mutual friend of ours.
Yes.
Who refuses to come on this show. But I'm still trying.
That's her boundary.
Also, that's her boundary. So she has not communicated that boundary. Like, I'm not coming on your show.
She said no.
She said no.
That's the boundary.
Okay.
No. A lot of people, the extent of what they know about boundaries is no. So yeah, the word no is a big part of boundaries, but the word yes is an equally important part of boundaries, because boundaries tell people what you're going to say no to. Yeah. Danielle will not be coming on the podcast. However, they also communicate what you're willing to say yes to.
Yeah.
So it's not just about your no's, it's about your yes.
Okay.
Also, boundaries help you figure out what you should be saying no to and what you should be saying yes to.
Okay.
So, yeah.
That's good. Oh, that's good about Danielle.
That's her boundary.
So she has communicated that to me through you.
No, I didn't know she wouldn't come on, but you told me she wouldn't come on, so that's a boundary.
I've been trying. I've been trying, in all honesty. I don't want her to call on me after she sees this. I've been trying to get her come up with different topics,
right,
that interest her.
Right.
So hopefully one day I hit the right topic and she'll come on.
Maybe.
Yeah. But so many things. Danielle is very well versed.
She is.
And
she
so
is.
I'm like, any topic that I can think of, or you can think of, that may motivate her to come on,
mm-hmm.
You got an inside track too. Let me know. Oh.
Okay. So that's my boundary. That you're not going to use me to get to my friend. Okay. That's a whole nother podcast. Okay. But go ahead.
Okay. So I didn't know before I talked to you that there were laws of boundaries. Mm-hmm. In fact, there are 10 laws of boundaries. Mm-hmm. I'm going to go through some of them. I have briefly discussed each one. You give me your.
So let's talk about law.
Okay.
Because, people have real broad definitions of laws now, including in government.
Okay.
So The 10 laws of boundaries come from one of the boundary gurus, Dr. Henry Cloud. And so he talks about that understanding these laws help us to understand how boundaries work.
Okay.
Okay. So they're not like a constitutional law, but they are 10 areas and 10 explanations of why boundaries work the way they do and why, if boundaries are not in our relationships, why relationships end up in chaos and conflict.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So here's one, the law of sowing and reaping. It
Okay.
says our actions have consequences.
Yeah. So I love that's the first law, the law of sowing and reaping. For and as a caveat, Dr. Cloud is a Christian counselor, so these laws are based on a Christian perspective,
Okay.
but they also have a world application.
Okay.
And so the law of sowing and reaping, if you are a believer, you know that the story of sowing and reaping, what you sow, you'll also reap. So if you plant something, then something will grow. But the first law also aligns with the law of cause and effect in
Okay.
the scientific community. If you do this, then this is going to happen. And so the law of sowing and reaping talks about how we have to allow people to experience natural consequences. You know, a lot of people talk about codependency. And so codependency really is birthed when when this law is not in action.
You said
So
birth, like
yeah,
B-I-R.
birthed.
Oh, wow.
So like, for example, if and this is a true story. So I have two adult children, and when they were in college, one of my children would overdraft their checking account every other day. I'm like, listen, I'm gonna need you. I'm tired of putting money in this account so it doesn't go into overdraft. I need you to manage your funds. I said that over and over again. I stated my boundary over and over again.
Okay.
But it wasn't until I stopped preventing that overdraft that they got the first time they went to slide their card and it was declined.
Yeah.
Then they understood that if you don't balance your checking account, you're not going to have any money to spend. Cause and effect. Reap and sow.
Okay.
And so what happens is when we are in codependent relationships, we rescue people from their natural consequences. That's what I was doing. I was rescuing my child from the natural consequences.
Yeah.
When we experience consequences, that's where the lessons are. Okay? That's where the lesson is. That's where the growth comes. So it's important that we love people, we care for people, but it's important not to interrupt the natural consequences because that's a boundary violation. What you reap is what you're going to sow.
And when you said not interrupt the natural flow, you mean
Consequences.
the consequences. So you let the consequences happen naturally.
Right.
Okay.
For every behavior, there's a consequence.
Because if
Okay.
you interrupt it, then you will continue to have your boundary violated.
Well, if you interrupt it, then that your boundary is violating. Because remember, I said that boundaries tell us what we should and what we should be saying yes to and what we should be saying no to.
Yeah.
Should I be saying yes to someone else's natural consequence? Should I be taking on someone else's consequence? No.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's go to the second one, the law of responsibility. We are responsible to each other, but not for each other.
Yeah.
That's powerful.
That's powerful. That is powerful. And so, as a believer, I believe that, it is my job to love everybody. Like,
Yeah.
we're supposed to love one another, but we're not supposed to be one another. So I can love you, okay, but not take on the responsibility for you and for your behavior.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are there certain situations where you don't have to love somebody? Because some
I
people
think you
are
can
not
love
lovable.
people from afar.
Okay.
I think everybody is lovable. Maybe
Are they?
that's not your assignment. I don't think everybody is our assignment.
Okay.
Yeah. So I can love you and not like you. I can love you and not be in a relationship with you. If you're someone who, continues to violate my boundary and make me feel unsafe, I'm going to step away, okay, from an active relationship with you, but I can still not wish you any harm. I can still pray for you.
Now, see, I can pray for you, but I don't think I have to love you.
Sir,
That's
do you be sending up these petty prayers? You know, it's some people that do these petty prayers like, Lord, get them.
well,
Come on,
now,
Alan.
with that said, the Bible does say,
Vengeance
vengeance
is
is
mine, says
thus
the
saith the Lord.
Lord.
Yes.
The Lord, Alan.
So so not a petty prayer when you say, Lord, handle that for me.
Well, you didn't wish them any harm
No,
because you're not telling God how to handle it.
right.
You're just saying
That's
handle
what I
it.
said. You don't. So do we really have to love everybody?
So when I say, I'm going to love everybody, that means that I am not going to purposely try to hurt somebody.
Okay.
If
All right.
something, I'm not going to wish any bad on them. I'm not going to wish harm to them. The way that I live my life and the way that I make decisions are going to be in a way that they don't purposely, try to harm people.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So then I can be down with the I can be down with the law of responsibility.
Yeah. Yeah.
Since I don't have to love everybody.
Right.
Because some people are not lovable. They make it hard for you to love them.
Yeah.
I can pray for you, but it'd be hard for me to try to love you.
But
Especially when you're doing dirt.
doesn't it take some sort of, the fact that you would pray for them tells me that that's a form of love, right? Like you're like, I pray you get your life together, honey. I pray that, I have been in workplaces where I'm like, Lord, I pray that they find a position for them because this is clearly not it.
Yeah.
So I'm not wishing that you're homeless and living under a bridge,
Yeah. The love of power. We have power over some things, but we don't have power over others, including changing people.
Yeah. So that really aligns with the law of responsibility. I'm going to be responsible for myself. Sort of like if somebody sits next to me in this empty movie theater, I can't make them move, nor do I have the power to move them, but I do have the power to move myself.
Yeah.
And then I've changed that situation.
Okay.
So, yeah.
That seems like an easy one.
Not so much because if you don't have a good awareness of boundaries, sometimes you're not able to identify what you are in control over. So like, let's say you're in a very toxic situation or relationship. Maybe, let's say it's a job.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be a relationship. It could be a job. And, it's a very harmful environment for you. Sometimes when you're in it, it's hard for you to identify what you do have control over. So what do I have control over? I have control over what time I get to work. Okay. I have control over, I'm going to take my lunch. Okay. I have control over, this is what time I'm going to stop working. Okay. I have control over how much extra interaction I'm going to have. Let's say it's people that are toxic. How much extra interaction. I have control over where I'm going to eat lunch. If I take a lunch, that doesn't mean if the break room is toxic, that doesn't mean I need to have to go in the break room.
Yeah.
I can sit in my office. I can go to my car.
Well, they were saying when you assume you make a ass out of you.
Yep.
So I guess I made an ass of myself.
No.
I said it was easy. I said it was an easy
No,
one.
I don't think setting boundaries are easy at all, because if they were, everybody would be doing it. But one of the things, I heard a quote one day that said that boundaries is what you do out of love for yourself and respect for other people. And so that's never easy.
Yeah.
Yeah, but necessary.
Let's see. The law of respect. If we wish for others to respect our boundaries, we need to respect theirs.
Yeah.
I won't say it sounds easy to follow, but
Definitely. So the best example I can give of that is like a lot of times I'm a parent of 2 adult children, adult by age. And so one of the things that I have a lot of clients that come in for therapy who are struggling with their adult children. So parenting adult children, it ain't for the weak, y'all. And so one of the things we talk about is the new boundaries that are needed when you're parenting adult children. So for example, I don't have control over where they go, their curfew, what kind of decisions they make, what kind of relationships that they are engaged in. I don't have any control over that, right? But I will say that one of the things that has helped me is by asking myself, is this something that I'm responsible for? Boundaries help you identify what you're responsible for. So I'll tell you a story. My daughter had moved out, and I have a granddaughter who's the joy of my life. I have two granddaughters now. One is a newborn and one is 6. And so this was before the newborn was born. My 6-year-old granddaughter, she's probably about 3. And so I called my daughter one day and I'm like, and I was going to stop by their house.
Yeah.
Okay. But she didn't answer the phone. So I'm like, okay, well, I'm keep on moving. So she called me later and she's like, what are you doing? I'm like, hey, I was in your area and I was going to stop, but you didn't answer. She's like, why didn't you come over? We weren't doing anything. And I'm like, you don't go to adults' house without calling. And she's like, Mom, but it's you. I'm like, Now, she may not have cared whether I stopped by, but that's my boundary. Number one, if I go over there and you got somebody over there that I don't approve of, if I had called first,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know, I would not have to address that.
Right.
Okay. If I don't like, the state of your house, okay, if I had called first.
You clean up.
So one of the things that adult parents struggle with is how much to get involved, and also understanding that, yeah, this is your child, but they are also an adult.
Yeah.
And so you wouldn't stop by your girlfriend's house without calling. So you shouldn't stop by your adult child's house without calling. And that's something that's hard, especially when they're young adults. But that's a change that I had to make. So I had power to set up the boundary so my own feelings won't get hurt. Right?
Okay.
So that's a good example of how boundaries will change over the season. When they were kids, okay, it was a different boundary. But now that they're adults, they're adult children, then my boundaries had to change with them as well.
That was a very good example.
Yeah.
The law of motivation, we must be free to say no before we can wholeheartedly say yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So remember, boundaries tell us what we should be saying yes to as well as what we should be saying no to. So a lot of times we say yes to things that clearly we don't have the time, the capacity, the financial resources for, or sometimes we just don't want to do it, and that's okay. So it's hard for you to know what to say yes to if you don't know what to say, if you don't say no to anything. So boundaries help us understand what is and what isn't our responsibility.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, that was an easy one.
That's an easy one. Easier.
Easy. The law of evaluation.
I love this one.
We need to evaluate the pain our boundaries cause others.
Okay. So
without an hour and a half explanation on that one.
So I love that. That's probably
like a tough one.
That's probably one of my favorite ones. Okay. So it's not what it seems. One of the reasons that people don't set boundaries is because they're afraid of hurting other people's feelings. They're afraid of looking bad or not good. Like with your parents, I want to be a good daughter. So if I set boundaries with my mom, then I'm not a good daughter. Totally false. So the law of evaluation talks about we have to evaluate if setting a boundary, which is going to make us feel safe and going to keep down chaos and communicate to people what we want, is that going to hurt or harm?
Okay.
Give you an example. My granddaughter hates the dentist. Okay. But we don't stop taking her to the dentist because it's going to hurt her feelings because she's scared. Not taking her to the dentist would harm her. It's the same thing with boundaries. If my boundaries, of course, we're going to expect pushback because people want what they want.
Right.
So if I tell you, no, I'm not coming on your podcast and your feelings are hurt, your feelings may be hurt. You may feel some kind of way about it, but I didn't harm you.
Yeah.
So the law of evaluation talks about we need to seek not to harm people, but if they disagree with our boundaries and their feelings are hurt, then that's their responsibility to manage their feelings about our boundary.
Okay. And Danielle, my feelings are not hurt, but I'm going to keep trying.
He seemed kind of hurt, Danielle. I don't know. Don't let him violate your boundary, girl. Keep repeating it.
The law of proactivity. We take action to solve problems based on our values, wants, and needs.
Yeah. So an easy way to explain that is that boundaries don't set themselves. You have to proactively set boundaries.
Okay.
Now, a lot of us end up, in a place where someone has violated our boundaries and we're like, oh, I got to do something about that. But we need to proactively set boundaries and communicate them because they don't set themselves. Like, I can't set boundaries for you
Yeah.
and then say, well, she should have known that. No, our boundaries are based on previous experiences, our history, our values, what makes us feel comfortable. So I can't know all that about you. So I can't assume
Right.
or that's not a boundary or it is a boundary. So it is your responsibility to proactively communicate your boundaries.
Okay, that makes sense. Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. But what we do is we expect other people to honor our boundaries, but we haven't set any.
Yeah.
Well, they should know that.
Right.
Yeah.
Is there such a thing as subliminal boundaries?
Boundaries always have to be communicated.
Okay.
No.
All right. So that's a no.
So with your behavior verbally, they have to be communicated. Yeah.
Okay. The law of envy. We will never get what we want if we focus outside our boundaries onto what others have.
Yeah. So, I love this because social media, that law reminds me of social media. You look on Instagram or TikTok and you see these influencers and all you see is all the great perks that come with being an influencer. But what you don't see is the hard work, the unpaid bills, many of them living with their parents, okay, because they're trying to build this business or this platform. And so what that law tells us is that you can't just envy what someone else has, okay? You have got to set your own boundaries because remember, boundaries are not only about the boundaries you set for others, but they're also about the boundaries and the limits that you put on your own behavior.
Okay.
So if I see somebody who has, lost 40 pounds, okay, and they're just chiseled, and I'm like, ooh, I wish I could do that. Well, you can set a boundary, put some structure, put some guidelines. You can't lose 40 pounds going to brunch every Sunday.
Yeah.
So we have got to set our own boundaries. Envy doesn't help us to obtain the goals that we want. We can look at someone and be inspired by them, but also be willing to set the boundaries and put the limits in place so that we can achieve our goals.
Okay. So I guess I need to stop envying my nephews who are half my age who don't have a double chin.
That part. And push back from the table.
So it's okay to have a gut and be.
If that's what you want.
Okay.
If that's what you want.
I don't want that, but I do need to work out.
Listen, I will tell you that I use the boundary work on myself. So I have a private practice. I'm really active in church. I work full time as a therapist for an agency. And one of the things that I had to really adjust my boundaries on was my time boundary, because we all say, well, I would do that if I had more time. And so I realized that the only time that I have to work out, and I work out with a trainer, shout out to my trainer, but is early in the morning. I'm not a morning person at all. I've never been a morning person. So one of the things that I've had to do is that time is sacred to me. So that means I got to go to bed early. That means I can't be out, on the nights before I know I have to work out. I've got to set a boundary and a limit. I can't drink the night before I know I'm supposed to work out.
Yeah.
I got to set a boundary and a limit in order to carve out that space, okay? I can't take kids to school on the day that, or my grandkids to school on the day that I have to work out. So boundaries help me carve out that space so I could practice the self-care that I needed to practice.
So you tell other people what you need to do, and that's your boundary, and expect them to adhere to those.
Well, yeah,
so you can get up in the morning and work out.
Exactly. So there's times that I have to say no to the event, or I got to leave the event early if I got to be up at 5, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm going to quickly run through 2 more because I have a bunch more questions to ask you before our time is up. The law of activity. We need to take the initiative in setting limits rather than be passive.
Yeah. Yeah. So that goes back to the subliminal boundaries you were talking about. That's really passive. that I'm not going to set a boundary, but I'm going to assume that someone should know better. Okay. Um, when my kids were younger, all the kids would hang out at my house. Okay. And one kid would come in the house and go in the refrigerator. And I'm like, did you just go in my refrigerator, son? Oh, yes, ma'am. I'm so sorry. So, had I never said, did you not just go in my refrigerator? What I communicated to him by not saying anything was that it's okay to just come in and go in my refrigerator. That's not okay at my house. You can't just come and go in my refrigerator.
Yeah.
So I have to state that. I have to be active in verbalizing that.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
The last one, but not least, the law of exposure. We need to communicate our boundaries to each other.
Yeah. Again, I don't know what your boundary is unless you've communicated that some way. You don't know what mine is unless I've communicated it. So boundaries don't set themselves.
Are boundaries learned or materialized by happenstance?
I think they're learned. So, for example, when your kids are little and you teach them, if my door is closed, you knock. Okay.
Or you may be in for a big surprise.
That's the natural consequences, reaping and sowing, cause and effect. Remember, boundaries keep us safe, right? Listen, that's why I don't go to my daughter's house without calling first. No, sir. Boundaries keep us safe, right?
Yes. Who
Cause
wants to
and
see
effect.
that?
Exactly. However,
Yeah.
that was a boundary that my parents taught me. I'm assuming that was a boundary that you were taught
Yes,
because we're relating to that.
Yes.
You'll be surprised of how many people that wasn't taught to them. So somewhere along the line, they had an experience that taught them that.
Yeah.
Okay. So sometimes boundaries are taught. Sometimes they're taught, we learn them the hard way because there's been a hard consequence. Yeah.
In setting boundaries, can people kind of go overboard and set them too rigid? And
Yeah.
if so, how does
Yeah.
one recognize?
Right.
I may need to calm this one down.
Right. So I like to describe healthy boundaries because there is such thing as a too rigid boundary and a too porous boundary. I like to describe healthy boundaries as a fence. So let's say you buy a house, nowadays they don't give you a fence when you buy a house. That's extra.
Yeah.
So you want to put up a fence and you're like, well, I can't really afford that fence. So you decide not to put up a fence. The coyote's going to get in your yard, the deer, everything's going to get in your yard. If you have a dog, he is not going to be confined. He's going to be in other people's yard. That is a lack of a boundary at all. Okay? So you decide you're going to put up a fence. You put up a fence, but you're like, I don't want anything getting in my yard. So you put up a cement fence. Okay? Nothing is going to get in your yard, but let's say you had a fire in your house and you had to go out the backyard, you're not going to be able to get out the backyard either. So that's an example of a boundary that's too rigid. So a boundary that's too rigid, you feel safe back here in your fortress, but the help, the support you need, you can't get. So a healthy boundary is a chain link fence with a gate. So you have a fence, you feel protected, you can open the gate when you need to allow something in, you can also close the gate when you don't want something in.
Sounds like you're describing cause and effect when you were talking about those boundaries and laws.
Yeah. You see how they work together?
I do see that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
How does someone deal with communicating to someone that we talked about what I would say gray areas. Are there such things as gray boundaries?
No. So there are such things
We
as
talked about the subliminal. That's what
flexible boundaries.
Flexible, okay.
Right. Because remember, your boundaries, you set boundaries based on the relationship, for example, that we know in the church community what a church hug is, right? So
what is a church hug?
A church hug is when a female gives a male a hug, but it's that little side hug like that. There's nobody. It's just like, oh, hey.
Yeah.
So men that I am not in an intimate relationship with, they all get a side hug, okay? My boundary is not, okay, I'm not going to hug you because that might be rigid.
Yeah.
Depending on my relationship. You're going to get a church hug. So I was at church a couple weeks ago, and my sister's really good friend, who was a male, was there. And I saw him. And I was like, hey. And I gave him my standard church hug. He was like, I know you didn't just give me no church hug. So again, that's an example of how your boundaries are different depending on the relationship and how close you feel to that person.
Right.
There's not a whole lot of males on this earth that I would hug full frontal. My son, my husband, my nephew, maybe my granddad, may he rest in peace. Other than that, everybody else gets a church hug.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, are there times where social norms conflict with personal boundaries?
Oh, all the time.
Give me an example.
All the time. So one of my boundaries is I don't discuss political stuff with people that I don't know.
Okay.
And I definitely don't discuss it in the workplace. Okay. And one of the reasons why that's my boundary, remember I talked to you about boundaries are sometimes born out of experiences, is that I have seen lots of people get fired for things that they have posted politically online. That's a whole nother story. Okay.
Right.
So my boundary is I don't get into political battles with people online. Okay. And I just don't talk politics with people that I am not close with. That's my boundary. That's not everybody's boundary, right? That's not everybody's boundary.
Yeah.
So one of the things that is important for us always to remember is that the boundary is set based on what makes you feel comfortable. So if someone says, hey, what do you think about A, B, and C that's going on? I either change the subject, separate myself, or don't say anything at all.
Yeah.
And if they ask, I'm like, oh, I don't really talk about, boundaries. I mean, I don't really talk about political stuff at work. Another boundary of mine is I am not friends with people that I work with on social media. Part of that comes out of my experience. I've seen lots of people get into some sticky situations. So if we're not friends in real life, we are not friends on social media.
Right.
That's my boundary. And I've had people say, well, I sent you a friend request. I was like, oh yeah, I don't really, girl, I'm not friends with people who I work with.
Right.
That's just my boundary.
And so that's been communicated.
Just like I just said.
Yes, you did.
Now, girl, I thought I told you I have a.
I wouldn't think that's a direct communication.
Oh yeah, it was.
Okay.
If you ask me directly, I'm gonna tell you directly.
What was your response that made me think it wasn't that direct?
No, it was just like that. I was like, girl, I already told you that I'm not friends. So I used to work in a pretty safety sensitive position.
Yeah.
And our team, they're like, well, you got to make sure you know what you're posting on social media and make sure that you scrub your social media. So what that taught me is that people go and look on your social media who are not really, don't have your best interests at heart and who are not really friends of yours.
Yeah.
And so I had a director one time, they was like, hey, I sent you a friend request. I was like, oh, I don't really friend people who I work with.
Yeah.
He was just like,
but this tone, the way you said your tone was, girl, blah, blah, blah. I'm thinking, okay, she's kind of halfway serious because it was your tone. It wasn't like very matter of
boundaries
fact.
don't have to be mean.
Oh well, okay.
You don't have to be mean the way.
Directness don't have to be communicated mean. It's like more direct. Like I just don't follow people I work. But it was like the nice way you said it.
Boundaries don't have to be mean.
To me, it's being direct.
I
It's
stated
like I
it.
just don't follow.
I stated it.
Okay.
She waited. She asked me.
Yeah.
I restated it.
Okay. Okay.
So when she left, this is so funny. When she left, shout out to my girl. She's like, can I follow you now? Can you follow me now? I'm like, because I don't like the people that you're friends with online.
See, that's more direct.
No.
I would have picked up on that. Because it wasn't like
And she just
half
laughed.
jokingly. It was matter of fact. Like,
Alan, I have a really good friend that I work with. This is for real, and she'll laugh when she sees this. Who we are real friends.
Yeah.
Like we do life together. We also work aligned together for the same agency. And she posted something with a picture of me, and it was at a work-related event. And so I was like, oh, I thought she had posted it on her personal account,
Yeah.
but it wasn't. It was on her professional account. And so I started seeing people comment on it. I called her. I said, I thought that you were going to post this on your personal account. Girl, I am not friends with these people. I'm about to unfollow you. And she just laughed. But the people who know me know, like, that's just my boundary.
Well, listen, Cassandra, I'm glad that you came on the show, and thank you for your professional
Thank you for
opinions and
having me.
discussions because I think it's very important. Again, follow me, subscribe, like the episode, And Cassandra, if people want to set up a session because you have private practice, how can
Yes.
they get in
Yes.
touch with you and reach you, set an appointment?
Right. So my website is Epiphany Counseling, EPIPHANY, epiphanycounselingtexas.com. You can also call me at 682-367-3300. I am also on Instagram and on Facebook.
Now, do you do virtual counseling?
Yes.
Okay, okay.
So I do exclusively virtual counseling. I also provide neurofeedback in office. Counseling's all virtual. I'm also available for speaking engagements and consultation for other therapists. And I'm also a licensed professional counselor supervisor. So I supervise LPC interns and associates.
Okay, great.